You squint at a battered can of beans in your hand, its dented surface a testament to the brutal journey you've endured to reach the now dead settlement of Arispe. Leaning against the bowed back of a door frame to a ranch-style home, you curse your luck for having to scavenge for scraps again like a half-starved coyote. Arispe, once a place of life and vitality, now lies barren and desolate. Surprisingly little food was left, as if it had all been snatched away as swiftly as the lives of the residents whose corpses still litter the center of the village. The beans are a welcome find, a small glimmer of hope against the devastation. You discovered them hidden behind a towering stack of porcelain bowls collected and forgotten by some long-gone owner who left them to gather dust in this forsaken place. 2 cans, and a half sack of rough-ground amaranth flour are all you managed to find. The label reads Beanie Weenie, the white letters standing out against a faded red backdrop. The expiration date is long gone, a faint blue smudge on the top of the can, but you too hungry to care about the details. Carefully prying it open with a half-rusted P38 can opener, you catch a whiff of the contents. The sweet scent of tomato sauce is there, but there's something off, something foul and putrid lurking underneath. Your stomach grumbles in anticipation nonetheless, willing to take the risk for the sake of a decent meal. The dark-haired woman has hastily put together a campfire that you hope will be ready soon for your food. She sits with her wounded leg extended and pokes at a poor collection of firewood scraps salvaged from the piles of junk around the decrepit structures of Arispe. You decide to try to break the tension, your voice rasping from dehydration. "So you know my name. What do you go by?" Your hand shakes slightly as you offer her the last can of Beanie Weenies you possess. A rare commodity in this bleak world. You make a motion to toss it and she catches it effortlessly, but her guarded expression doesn't change much. "Esperanza," she says after a long pause. Her name rolls off the tongue with a hint of a Mexican accent. She turns her accent back to the fire, expertly skewering a lizard for her dinner. It's a desert iguana, and a particularly fat specimen. Scent of sizzling flesh fills the air, and your stomach grumbles in response. As she tends to the fire, you take a moment to scrutinize her features. Though not particularly tall, there's a quiet confidence in her stance that speaks of someone who's seen more than her fair share of hardship. Her sharp facial features give her an almost severe appearance, but there's a glimmer of something softer in her eyes. Her arms are adorned with an eclectic mix of tattoos, from delicate tribal designs to crude markings that seem to tell a story of their own. A thunderbird spreads its wings in a vibrant display of blue and red, its sharp talons almost coming to life on her skin. Despite her guarded demeanor, there's a sense of vulnerability lurking beneath her tough exterior. You wonder about the meaning of the tattoos, but you don't ask. You get the sense that she's not one to share her past easily. "In return for all that staring you're doing, why not give me another of your antibiotics?" Esperanza asks, glaring up at you. She tips a black cowboy hat similar to your own to protect her eyes from the yellow rays of the sun that peek around the edge of the home. Your boots make the bowed wooden steps creak as you step down and reach the inside of your backpack that leans up against the crumbling cinder block foundation of the home. It's now full again with most of the items the woman stole from you a day or so earlier. She'd grudgingly handed them back on the condition you share anything she needed during your upcoming journey together. Not that she had the right, but you didn't object. You remind yourself that you were supposed to be making the desert of what was once West Texas a better place. And despite your unfortunate first encounter, she indeed could have done much worse when she found you dehydrated and unconscious. She even gave you some fresh water for your canteen, which likely saved your life. Whoever she was, whatever history she had, Esperanza was not a bad or selfish woman. You produce a blue bottle of fish amoxicillin and walk over to the woman to hand her one of the capsules. You clench your teeth and grunt through the pain as you squat down beside her at the fire, your aching body protesting every movement. Your last trek across the unforgiving desert left you in dire need of rest. But you don't need Esperanza to see that. She'd leave you behind if she thought you'd slow her down. Of that you have no doubt. She tears at the lizard flesh with the frenzied urgency as if every second counts. A fleeting rest had been enough for her. You catch her sizing you up as she stands with only a slight wince of obvious pain from her now rebandaged wound, her eyes darting to and from you with a calculating stare. Her gait is steady as she walks to gather her things, and there's no hint of a limp. You retrieve your now burned and boiling can of beans. It's cooked nearly beyond recognition. You stir the contents with your trusty titanium spork. The beans have turned to a mushy slurry, but it's good as you take a nibble of the steaming brew. So good to have something with a little extra spice and flavor. As you eat, Esperanza wipes her face with the back of her hand and turns to you. Why do you care what happens to my daughter? You hesitate, your mind racing with the memory of your own loss, unsure if you're ready to reopen the old wound by giving voice to it. I have my reasons, you say, your voice tinged with sorrow you find hard to fight back. Let's just say that I know what it's like to lose someone you love. The woman nods, appearing satisfied at your words. You both eat your respective meals, lost in your own thoughts. After licking your spork clean of the last ancient tomato sauce from the can, you wash it down with a dented copper decanter of water Esperanza had placed before the fire earlier, sliding it your way without a word. It's warm but welcome. For a moment you wonder if the odd act of charity was not a ploy to drug you so she could travel off without you. No, you tell yourself, if she'd wanted me gone, she could have rid herself of me a few times over since she first found me. You gulp down as much of the water as you can stomach and rise to pack up your remaining supplies to prepare to set out again. Your sinew and bones protest every movement as you straighten and stretch to your full height. Perhaps you should let Esperanza set out first after all, your weary half thinks. No, you're used to traveling alone, and sure, you could track her in the gritty sand and dust if needed, but you have a nagging feeling that she might hold the key to more than just finding her missing daughter. If she's hiding anything about the men and the strange vehicles who took her child, or if she knows anything more, you hope to get that out of her on the journey. At least together you'll have a better chance to survive whatever the desert decides to throw at you today. Even with a full belly, you remind yourself that you still need to stock up on water for the journey. The inhabitants of this town, to your fortune, had built a simple water collection system on several of the roofs around the settlement that drained into faded blue or white plastic barrels. Around these sat empty jugs of varying sizes. One of the barrels closest to you is about half your height, made of a yellowed white plastic with scratches and discolorations all over its surface. You could see it was about half full. It was more of the life-giving liquid than you had seen in several moons, and you wished you could take it all with you. The balance between carrying enough water and too much was always a challenge in the desert. You grab a yellow jug and turn a squeaky brass faucet fitted to the base of one of the barrels. A lone black vulture is perched up upon a nearby rooftop and squawks loudly at you. As you fill the jug, you recite something that comes to mind now and again. Old as time, but your own version of something you read long ago. The lament for the city of Ur. Old Ur's brickwork all torn down, just a wreck now. Used to be a righteous town, now it's just a ruin. Dead bodies litter the streets where folks used to stroll and greet. The boulevards where they danced at feasts were now full of fodder for the beasts. You glance up once more at the vulture as it hops from side to side. Your eyes fall back across the settlement to where you can see some of the small orchard with the dead trees. If only these people had thought to run a simple drip irrigation system with all the water they collected. Perhaps it was your fault for expecting too much or caring too little for the obstinate settlers of Arispe. Not that it mattered now. All the fruit in the world wouldn't have saved them from senseless death. You take the saplings from your pack and soak their rag-wrapped root balls in the water from a jug. You eye the cloudy water warily as you carry it back to the fire. Several black vultures are circling overhead now, drawn to the stench of death from the villagers whose bodies are thankfully out of your line of sight behind another home. A few ravens arrive as well, though most hang back in the bushes, away from the larger birds. The sight of the birds perched on the buildings, their filth staining what's left of deteriorated rooftops, only increases your resolve to boil the water completely. You pour the water into a battered aluminum pot with a wobbly handle. You place it over the fire, careful not to spill any of the precious liquid. Little things can mean the difference between life and death. Esperanza has already started to send you impatient glances, but you know the dangers that lurk in this water, just as deadly as the botulism you narrowly avoided by overcooking the beans. You raise your palm and urge her to wait. Soon after you've stashed as much boiled water as you can carry, you join Esperanza where she is standing near the edge of Arispe. The crisp boot tracks lead back to where the vehicles had stopped just outside the settlement. There was no mistaking the direction they took when they left Arispe either. Large and wide, simple treaded tire marks run deep into the sandy soil. Solid tires, you comment, though Esperanza is already impatiently headed after the tracks. Explains why they can run right over the brush. You can only wonder at the power required to propel the large vehicles across the desert at the speed you witnessed. The vehicles had cut a swath through the desert landscape toward the southwest, making an easy-to-follow path for you and Esperanza to follow. Creosote bush, desert sage, osatillo, all were crushed beneath the massive tires of the vehicles. You follow just behind Esperanza, who makes no attempt at conversation and stays just far enough ahead of you that it's not worth the energy to shout for her attention. She still seems resigned and puzzled at your presence, glancing back at you only briefly when you trip and stumble, the gear you carry rattling loudly. You thought she would be relieved to have your support in her mission, but her expression remains cautious and aloof. You take care to make every step count, walking in as straight a line as possible as you follow the vehicle's path in the waning desert heat of late day. The dry branches of flattened bushes repeatedly crunch under your boots. The vehicle's tracks make your progress nearly as easy as traversing the broken pavement of I-10. They make a beeline toward the Quitman Mountains, swerving only occasionally due to a large yucca tree or uneven terrain. As you progress further, you're surprised to see that they even managed to find a good and shallow path across the gully wash you had crossed over before arriving in Arispe this morning, and without deviating from a straight line, almost as if they knew the exact path to take all the way from Arispe. Of course that was impossible, seeing as how there were no roads. The technology that might have allowed for such pinpoint accuracy in navigation was long gone. As you walk into the gully, you notice signs that the vehicles had stopped, if only for a moment. Tracks with the same crisp boot treads surround the tire tracks. You stop to examine the footprints, your eyes sharply analyzing the shapes and depths left in the soft earth. Esperanza steals a glance at you and stops for a moment, uncapping her canteen to drink. There are many of them, all headed in the same direction, as if a large group had marched through. You follow them carefully, scanning the ground for anything useful in their behavior. At a point where the gully deepens, there are 3 circular holes in the ground. You walk up to them on the soft, silty earth and peer down. The holes are all cylindrical and a few feet deep, as if the ground had been extracted and removed. Only a few tiny mounds of disturbed sandy soil surround each. Odd. What did they want with the soil from the wash, you wonder? You follow Esperanza up and out of the gully wash, making your way back into the unforgiving desert. The sun beats down on you from the west as you walk toward it, scorching your exposed skin and leaving you parched. The wind howls, kicking up dust devils that dance and whirl around you. Despite the conditions, you push forward, driven by a shared sense of purpose. As you trudge through the Chihuahuan desert, you manage to get alongside Esperanza, who slows her walk and looks at you in the eyes for the first time in what if must have been hours. As you trudge through the Chihuahuan desert, you manage to get alongside Esperanza, who slows her walk and looks at you in the eyes for the first time in what must have been hours. She has tears welling up in her own as she walks. Undoubtedly, she's thinking about her daughter, but she maintains a strong and determined posture. "Are you prepared to fight if it comes to that?" she asks, her tone a mix of concern and urgency. "I don't have much to defend myself with," you reply, patting your 9mm, "but I'll do whatever it takes." Esperanza grips a .22 revolver on one hip and a Bowie knife on the other, signaling her readiness for the task at hand. May not be much, but it's sufficient for close combat. You offer a nod and a smile. "We'll bring her back," you declare confidently. The words spill out before you can even think to hold them back. Esperanza's large brown eyes flash toward yours, and you sense that she's as surprised as you are at your own bravery or foolishness. This was, after all, a group of armed men who killed off an entire settlement, apparently without losing one of their own. "Her name is Nayeli," she says, smiling bittersweetly. You and Esperanza trudge through the barren Chihuahuan desert with a renewed sense of purpose, rivulets of sweat trickling down your faces and backs. The air is thick with the pungent aroma of dust and crushed desert vegetation. But amidst it all, you detect the faint scent of Esperanza's sweat. Strangely, you find the smell comforting, despite the dire circumstances you both find yourselves in. As you continue onward, Esperanza tells you more about her life. She speaks of her daughter with a fierce determination. Through her words, you hear a mother's love that refuses to be broken by the darkness of the world. She talks of her family long ago, how they raised her, of struggles, of her dreams for Nayeli and the future. You listen, impressed and captivated by the strength and resilience of this woman, but also with a creeping sense of shame that you had not been as strong for your own son. Had you abandoned Warren to his fate? You second-guess your own actions after his disappearance once again. The trails of blood, the signs of struggle. You blamed raiders or, even worse, cannibals, but what if it had been someone else? You were blinded to the loss, confused by your own grief mixed with rage. Had you checked the area thoroughly? Had you seen those clear boot prints before? You dare to think you might have, but could have been your mind playing tricks. No, you would have remembered such a thing, you tell yourself. But if part of you wants to believe otherwise. The sun had begun to set over the Quitman Mountains ahead of you. Though you had already traveled a long distance in the waning hours of the day, you had not yet seen a place to stop for a break to regain your strength. You are certain that Esperanza will not want to stop, but you think you can convince her that you'll have a better chance in a fight with rest, especially if you intend to walk in onto the night. You've scribbled a map of the area in your backpack, but you've committed it to memory, and you know there is little shelter in the direction you're walking towards the mountains. You rack your brain for any recollection of buildings or homes in the way and recall one. There was an old gas station, or perhaps it was a private LPG refueling stop on a long north-south road that ran all the way down to the old border with Mexico. You hadn't been down that way since before the bombs fell, but you're sure at least a few standing homes would be available along the way. After miles of more walking, you spot a dilapidated station in the distance, roughly where you remembered it on the other side of the paved road. Indian Hot Springs, you recall. You wonder if there are still hot springs where the road ends down south. The once red metal walls of the station were now faded to a faint purple in the dimming orange sunset's rays. It looms like a beacon in the endless expanse of sand, bushes, and rock, a welcome respite from the blistering heat. But as you draw closer, you see that it is not the abandoned relic you were hoping for. Instead, it's a hub of activity. It looms like a beacon in the endless expanse of sand and rock, a welcome respite from the residual desert heat of a long day. But as you draw closer, you see that it is not the abandoned relic you are hoping for. Instead, it's a hub of activity. The sound of a lone revving engine and the dark shape of a raider's vehicle, an old sedan with its doors and roof torn off, emerge from around a corner of the building. You make another unfortunate discovery. The heavy tracks of the unusual vehicles end at the pavement's edge. Nowhere can you see in the fading daylight where they pick up again on the other side of the road. And once night falls, you'll have more difficulty than you had anticipated in finding them again if they eventually did, even with a full moon on your side. The timing was terrible. You raise a hand toward Esperanza. We need to wait until dark before we move. If we're spotted, they'll chase us down. What if they know something, she asks. I'll wring it from their scrawny necks if they know anything about the people who took my daughter. You sigh and consider your options. When it gets dark, we can have a look. You and Esperanza sit on the ground behind a large acetillo bush. As the night comes, you hear music emanating from the station. Music, laughter, and what now sounds like the cries of wild animals carry your way. Raiders have some source of power for the music and lights that now bathe the station in a fluorescent glow, but unfortunately for you, it's not a noisy gas generator. Other than the music, the desert was dead silent. You whisper your thoughts to Esperanza, and she agrees that if you're going to spy on the raiders, now is your chance to do it. You cautiously approach the station, taking care to remain hidden in the shadows of moonlight. Crossing the rough asphalt at the right spot, you're able to use cover from a few bushes that grow up through the cracks. You both manage to make it to one of the walls of the station. You peer around a corner and raise a hand to keep Esperanza behind you. Crackling speakers blare, Del Reeves' voice singing Girl on the Billboard. You spot 4 raiders sitting below a string of lights on a makeshift patio and picnic table. Another is out working in his vehicle. They seem to have made this place their own for some time based on the ring of garbage at the edges of the area which had been cleared by repeated tire tracks. Of course, these tracks were nothing like the ones you had been following. You spot another one of the raiders' vehicles that looks heavily damaged. It's little more than a go-kart with a pintle mount for a machine gun. Its tires are a tiny fraction of the size of the ones you'd been following. Despite their revelry, 2 of the raiders are covered in dried blood from head to toe, and one of their number pours a small bottle of alcohol on an open gash in his arm. The sweaty, bald man screams in pain through a black, bushy beard while another holds him down. The rest half-heartedly laugh and make crass comments at his expense as they fill glasses with more alcohol. This seems to lighten the mood for everyone, but there's an underlying tone of unease that you're not used to seeing in their type. Next time we should lay a trap for them, one of them says as he downs his drink. They're as rough a looking bunch as any. Their faces are weathered from years of living in the harsh desert sun, and their clothes are tattered and stained with dirt, oil, and blood. One of them has a jagged scar across his cheek, while another is missing several teeth. They all have a desperate look in their eyes, however, like wild animals that have been backed into a corner. Something has shaken them. The man pouring alcohol on his wound looks to be the leader. His arms are covered in tattoos of skulls and other ominous symbols, and his muscles bulge as he struggles against his comrade. The sight of his blood mixing with the alcohol, along with the stench of their sweat in the wind, is enough to make your stomach turn. No, he says, looking at the rest. Next time they come through, we'll let them pass. One of the men looks down at his boots and snorts in derision. The leader grabs him with his wounded arm and shouts into the raider's face, spittle flying from his beard. Do you have a death wish? The raiders all shake their heads. The leader lies back, satisfied. Good. We keep losing men, and we won't be able to take from sleeping grandmothers. Let those sons of bitches pass through. We have no business south anyway. Get me another drink, he shouts. The music halts for a moment, the Del Reeves song cutting into a lively Tejano tune you don't recognize. As if on cue, the raiders raise their glasses for another round of raucous laughter and cheers. Esperanza taps you on the shoulder, giving you a knowing look. She's heard enough. She points to the ground beside you. A few of the crisp boot prints you recognize from Arispe crisscross in front of the station. They had stopped there, but not for long. She motions to her right, along the wall, to a door with a window. You trade places with her as she keeps an eye on the raiders. You peer through cloudy, broken glass on the heavy steel door and see that the station is filled with barrels smelling of gasoline and ethanol. That's not all. Stacks of various snacks and other packaged foods overflow from a pair of cardboard boxes that on a shelf near the door. Also on the shelf is a chaotic pile of other valuables and coins. This wasn't just a fuel depot. The pumps and station itself was dry of gasoline and diesel long before the bombs fell. This was their headquarters. Just a handful of what you see inside could feed you for days and set you up for several successful barter trades in the weeks ahead. As you weigh your options, a raider unzipping his pants to urinate stumbles into view. His gaze falls directly in your hiding place. He shakes his head vigorously as he squints at you, clearly drunk. You freeze, heart racing, as he raises his weapon. You! What are you? Before you can fire, Esperanza charges forward, a fierce determination in her eyes. You follow her lead, drawing your own weapon, but before you can take aim, she has already plunged her knife straight into his throat. He drops to his knees, eyes bulging, clutching at the weapon embedded in his neck. His struggles are only momentary before he collapses in a heap. Esperanza's eyes are wild, but she summons the sense to drag the man back out of the open side of the building to where you're hiding. Damn it, you whisper. Won't be long until they realize he's gone. We have to go. Esperanza yanks her knife free from the man's throat. Blood flows down his filthy neck and chest, and he twitches for a moment before going still. You glance back to the window. As if sensing what you're thinking, Esperanza reaches for the door as she wipes the raider's blood on her pants leg. Let's get a little before we go, she says, yanking hard at the door, her veins still pumping adrenaline. A jingling bell perched above the door on the inside echoes through the station as she steps within. She spins around and locks eyes with you, her hand covering her mouth. Louis, one of the raiders can be heard calling. You trying to take more than your cut again? Laughter follows. Louis, of course, does not answer. The lifeless eyes of his slumped body stare out into the night. You wait frantically for her to come. She grabs a couple of bags of chips that look new, though they were clearly pre-collapse, and rushes out to where you are holding the door. What do we have here? The leader with his wounded arm stands in your way as you move to leave. There's a cute one. Come out of the desert just for us to play with, he says, motioning toward Esperanza. Two of the other raiders stumble out behind him, chuckling. A little old for me, one of them says, slapping the other raider on the back and bearing a yellow-toothed grin. But I won't turn her down. The other only grins and draws a machete, while the leader reaches for something under his vest. Your pistol was still in your hand, and you quickly raise it to fire. 3 loud cracks reverberate through the desert air. The leader goes down, clutching his chest. Another cry comes from around the corner behind you. You and Esperanza are outnumbered, but you have the element of surprise. You take cover behind a stack of rusted oil drums as bullets whiz past your head. Esperanza is behind a decrepit fuel pump, firing her revolver with deadly accuracy. The raiders are relentless, perhaps in part because they're hopelessly drunk. To your surprise, another one who must have been out of view earlier shows up from around the far corner. Eyes wild, the sledgehammer held over his head. Your pistol is empty, but you fight with everything you've got. You hold your shiny 6-inch knife at the ready, dodging the clumsy hammer attack easily. You plant it in the man's side and he tumbles into the building, losing hold of his weapon. You kneel down and stab him repeatedly until he ceases struggling. These men were ruthless and deserved no mercy. After what seems like an eternity, the last raider falls to the ground, a bullet from Esperanza lodged in his chest. Breathing heavily, you take a moment to survey the area around you. The station is now a scene of chaos and destruction. Broken glass and debris litter the ground, and the stench of gasoline and blood fills the air. You and Esperanza exchange a look of relief and understanding. You both know that the journey ahead will not be easy, but with the raiders' ill-gotten loot and supplies, and perhaps even a working vehicle, you dare to think you've upped your chances. You hear Payne chuckle from the leader, and he nods, beckoning you closer. As you stand over the man, his breathing becomes ragged and shallow. His beard is stained red with blood that oozes from his lips. You can see the life slowly fading from his eyes as more blood pools beneath him. His face is contorted in pain, and he gasps for breath as you kneel down beside him. You sense a certain sadness and desperation in his eyes. Despite the pain, he manages to speak. "We had it all figured out, you see," he says with a cough. "We knew how to take what we needed and without wiping out the settlements. And we kept the other raiders out too. We were strong, but then those strangers came out of nowhere. I don't know who you are, but you wouldn't have gotten within a mile of us if we hadn't run into them." "What did they want from you?" you ask. "We tried to take them, to make them ours, to get those beautiful vehicles they drive. After all, the people inside, they bleed too, right? They were too fast, too well protected. It's some kind of military before the bad times." You stare with barely concealed contempt at the man, his breaths becoming shallower with each passing moment. Before the collapse, a man like him would have been locked up in prison. Out here he'd been king. His eyes bulge as he struggles to speak, his voice barely a whisper. He wheezes out a story of his crew and their domination in the area, the pride and hubris of a man who once held power that he had never imagined. Perhaps he thinks that by telling you these things you'll keep his legend alive. Truth is, you'd rather see him dead and forgotten like the others laying about him. You keep nodding encouragingly with a false smile, hoping the man will reveal more about the vehicles and the men who had beaten them. Esperanza loses her patience and grips the man by the throat. "Did you see a girl with them?" she shouts into his ear. "I die with a pretty desert flower at my side," the man says, reacting slowly, his eyes glazing over as he continues to speak. "We knew every inch of this land, girl. No one could touch us. You got lucky. Those men, their vehicles, they changed everything. Ghosts from another time." A puzzled look crosses his face. "But they didn't even try to chase us when we fled." "A girl, my daughter, they took her," Esperanza repeats. He coughs again, blood spattering from his lips. "I didn't see any girl," he says, smiling at Esperanza. "None except you, old girl. But now it doesn't matter anymore. I'm gonna die here." His eyes flicker toward you, a mix of regret and defiance in his gaze. "But mark my words, stranger. You won't find what you're looking for. They told us. No one stands in the way of the scientists."